Hello everybody, today I would like to talk about the issue of innateness. This is an issue that has been puzzling humankind for thousands of years. So I think it's worth to discuss this matter and hopefully find some answers. In this talk I would like to first give you a historical background of the issue and then give you some examples from the math, language and morality. And at the end, I would like to discuss the significance of this debate. Why do we even care to talk about innateness? Have you ever thought about whether or not we have any innate ideas, concepts, categories, principles, knowledge, or even morality by birth? Or do we start as a blank slate, knowing nothing when we are born? And this is a fundamental question to ask. So many people take this argument up until Plato era, but I would like to take it a little bit before Plato. So in the pre-Socratic era, we see two main ways of thinking about the mind. On one hand, Empedocles, on the other hand, Anaxagoras. Empedocles, a Greek pre-Socratic philosopher who thought that the mind is made or designed for the world. Therefore, mind comprehends reality because it's pre-tuned, pre-programmed, pre-designed to the world. That's how it understands it. On the other hand, Anaxagoras, another Greek pre-Socratic philosopher who lived in today's Turkey, actually, where I am from, and he had a different opinion. He said, the world shapes our mind. So the world shapes our unformed mind into its form. So this image of the world informing the knower manifested itself in the 17th century as a tabula rasa. According to Plato, all learning is an act of recollection. So if something is a recollection, that means it's already in us. We just have to remember what it is, right? So according to Plato, everything we learn or we will ever learn is in us as a form. What Plato meant by form is a transcendent reality of a perfect or ideal version of a thing. So we know everything, we just need to remember what we know. In the dialogue, Socrates, the teacher of Plato, supports this argument by simply asking an uneducated slave the right questions. By asking these guided questions, the slave comes to understand that he knows about the Pythagorean theorem. So the slave actually discovers for himself rather than being taught. He just discovers for himself. So Socrates used the term pre-existing, which means that there's a stage before we are born, that took place before we are born, and this was used as the argument of the immortality of the soul. So notice that this innateness / nativism idea initially was related to the idea of immortality of the soul. So we were thought before we were actually born. Now what we are doing is we are remembering the things that we were taught before we were born. So Aristotle, on the other hand, a prize student of Plato, rejected Plato's nativism because according to him, form is not a transcendent reality, but it's actually a part of a thing. So it's not a thing that goes beyond the thing. It's part of the thing. And also Aristotle rejected the poverty of stimulus argument. What's this poverty of stimulus argument? According to Plato, we have very limited experiences to create a perfect form in our mind. So therefore, this perfect forms, it has to be innate in us. It has to be. We have to know this before birth. We are not learning this through our experiences because we have limited experiences, not only limited but imperfect experiences to create a perfect form. I would like to now jump to Enlightenment period. René Descartes, a French philosopher who lived in the 16th and 17th century, stated that our experiences are actually too limited to generate such a mathematical concepts such as triangle, as we are always confronted with imperfect examples of triangles in the nature. So if we are experiencing imperfect triangles in the nature, how do we come to the idea of a perfect triangle? Notice that how this is similar to what Plato was talking about. This is the same argument as the poverty of the input or poverty of the stimulus. So another philosopher, John Locke, a British English philosopher who lived in the 17th and 18th century, and he was credited as the father of liberalism, borrowed Anaxagoras' ideas on the mind and stated that we are born as blank slates, tabula rasa, which means we have no built-in mental content or knowledge. All we know is from our experiences or from our perceptions. Wilhelm Leibniz, the 17th and 18th century German philosopher, claimed that truth about numbers are in us, but we learn them. So the numbers, as truth is, they are in us, they are embedded in us, but we learn about them. Another German philosopher who lived in the 18th and 19th century, Immanuel Kant, stated that we cannot understand space if we don't have the concept of space in us. So therefore, to him, if we can understand something, we have to have the concept of that thing in us. So that concept is a priori before the experience, meaning that the experience comes after the concept. If the concept is within us, and then we see the experience, we experience the experience, then we comprehend it, we can understand it. Notice how these nativist claims are mainly coming from mathematical domain, because I think mathematics are a perfect domain to give examples for the innateness argument. So up until now we talked about the ancient thinkers. How about today's current thinkers? The most favorite nativists are Steven Pinker and Noam Chomsky, in my opinion. And Steven Pinker is a Canadian-born American cognitive scientist, and Noam Chomsky is an American linguist, philosopher, cognitive scientist, historian, social critic, and political activist. And today's nativists, push the idea of innateness into center of cognitive science, and largely because of the studies and publications by Noam Chomsky. The nature versus nurture argument still continues, but one of the biggest philosophers, thinkers of the nativist philosophy is Chomsky, as I mentioned before. And on the other side of the spectrum, we see Skinner, even though he's not alive anymore, but Chomsky is still. So Chomsky said that the way Skinner explains how we learn language just doesn't make sense. Skinner, for example, argued that language is controlled by environmental input. So, like to Skinner, the environment has an upper hand in the process of learning language. Remember, the ancient argument is the mind is designed to comprehend the world, or the world impresses itself on us and forms our mind. So we see that Chomsky says our mind is designed to comprehend the world, and then Skinner's argument will be the environment, our experiences form our mind. For example, Chomsky said the language is stimulus independent, meaning that one could choose to say anything regardless of their environmental situation. So you could be in an environment and that might push you to think this way, but you can choose to say anything. It's not stimulus dependent, according to Chomsky. Skinner, for example, saw language as a result of training. However, Chomsky stated that understanding sentences requires more than just learning. What he meant was we understand things that we have never heard in our lives before. So how is it possible that we say things that we have never ever heard in our lives? So if it is all about training, you could only speak what you hear. So the input from your environment and the output, how you speak, how you write, will be the same, right? But it's not the case in language. We speak sentences that probably nobody ever spoke in the history of humankind. So therefore, we must have an innate device, according to Chomsky, that enable us to decode the language and help us acquire language, so we can produce infinite creative ways of expressing ourselves, regardless of what our environmental stimulus is imposing on us. So the nativists think that language is an innate ability. It's not a learned ability, like the behaviorists will assume. According to behaviorists like Skinner and his followers, it's a learned behavior. It's a learned thing. You just listen to other people, imitate them, and there's someone modeling you the language, and then you just get it, like as if like someone is teaching you how to tie your shoes. You look at them, tie their shoes, and you imitate them. Voila, you get it. But nativists said no. This is a very actually primitive way of looking at the language acquisition, because language is such a complex thing. You cannot simply imitate the complexity of the language, because you produce something unique. You don't just produce something that you see in your environment. So one of the key concepts is the poverty of input. And remember how this is related to the ancient philosophy, right? From just Plato and even before. That this term refers to the notion that children cannot learn language based on the limited linguistic input they receive. If something is limited, if our input is limited, then the output is not limited, that means something is going on. It's not a simple act of copying. There must be something. And therefore children learn or / acquire to be the better word here, language based on innate ability, not based on the environmental inputs or the modeling that we see from others. Especially there are some studies showing that adults don't really provide much input when it comes to language. What happens is that we just parents just shun away from they don't really correct children's grammar. Just children, when they're spoken to a language, they just acquire the language. They just decode that language. They make mistakes initially, but later on they catch up, and then they learn the perfect grammar. So I think looking at the concept of climb is going to help us understand this innateness argument better. Let's do a little exercise. Okay, let's think about the concept of climb. You will think that's such an easy concept, right? It means just, what does climb mean? It just means you go up, right, on something. But when you really closely examine the concept of climb, you see that this is really not a simple task to define what falls into the concept of climb and what falls out of the concept of climb. For instance, when we say climbing up the ladder, we are talking about going upward. The action is going up, right? But it could also mean going down. The climb also means going down. Like, for instance, when we say climbing down the ladder, right? Now the action is going down, so it's not up. Now it's down. It could also go a little bit more complex when you say he climbed the fence. That means it's not only he went up, but also over a thing, right? And there are so many different examples that falls into the concept of climb, and there's actually a study published on this, and that's what I'm talking about. This is from a study, and this is going to be on the reference page, the reference slide. When you think about it, even the very simple concepts, when you think about it, it's very hard to define what falls in it, what falls out of that concept. So if things are that complex, which they are, it tells us something that if things are very complex, how do a young child, when you talk about climb, and they don't hear all the different examples of climb, but they get a sense of what climb is? How is it possible? Again, they have the concept of climb in them. What they're looking for is just they are experiencing the examples that they see in their life, and they say, this experiences correspond to this concept that I have in my mind. So according to Chomsky, human nature provides us the concept of climb, and we just learn to put the label on it. What's the label here? It's the sound, which differs from one language to another, but the concept of climb is in us, no matter where you are born. So far, I talked about some examples from mathematics and language, and I want to talk a little bit about morality. Like, can we find some examples of innateness? But before that, I want to mention two more studies about math, and then I will talk about the morality issue. Like a study conducted by Antel and Keating showed that the ability of neonates, like 1 to 6 days old babies, they were able to detect numerical differences between collection of 2 and 3 objects. So how on earth that 1 or 6 days old babies are able to detect numerical differences between the collection of 2 and 3 objects? How is it possible? So do they have experience? No, they don't really have that experience, right? So which tells us before the experience they have that innate knowledge that 2 and 3 are not the same thing. They are different things. So isn't that an innate ability that no one really teaches us with the experience? It's in us. It's an innate ability. So therefore, the research really provides evidence that we have some mathematical and linguistic abilities before we are born. Another study done by Libertus and others found a correlation between numerical estimation and math skills in young children. So these findings provide evidence that between a relationship between a primitive sense of number and math ability starting early in life. So there are many research providing evidence that there is some innateness going on when it comes to math and language. How about morality? Hamlin, Wynne, and Bloom, Paul Bloom, the professor at Yale University, he's a psychologist, and Dr. Wynne is, I believe, his wife, and they did fabulous research about babies, about their mathematical knowledge and moral knowledge. So their research showed that 6 and 10 months old infants prefer an individual who helps another individual compared to the individual who does not help the individual. So even 6 and 10 months old infants, they prefer the good guy versus the bad guy. And these infants also prefer helpful individual to a neutral individual. And they also prefer a neutral individual to a bad individual. Isn't that amazing? How do they even know at this young age? Another study done by Hamlin and Wynne showed that infants prefer individuals who display pro-social behaviors towards unrelated third parties compared to those who display antisocial behaviors. So infants choose or prefer social people over antisocial people. So how is it possible that at a very young age children do that? There's only one logical explanation to me, that if something comes before the experience, that means it has to be moral. Now, does this mean that we have all the moral codes in us before we are born? I don't want to go that far, but what these research says, that we have the fundamentals of morality embedded in us. And when we are faced with experiences, these fundamental structures they turn on, and they provide the basic foundation for later complex mathematical skills, moral behaviors, etc., etc. And this example was used by Chomsky in the language case. He talks about how having a seed, and when you put the seed in the pot and then cover it with soil, and then you water the seed, and then seed starts growing, right? So saying that experience really teaches us, it's like the same thing as saying that the water teaches the seed how to become a plant. What water does is just provides the optimum environment for that seed to become what it's designed to become. So when you think about this way, I think it helps a lot in this argument of innateness. Like, you don't really see a baby bird being taught by a mama bird, right? They don't say, okay, now first you open this wing and then this wing and then jump and then flip this wing and then this wing and then voila, you start learning how to fly. It's better to think about this skills as like a like a seed implanted in us. When it comes to the point where it's the right time, when it comes to the right maturity level, this seed starts growing with the help of the experience. Experience enables those seeds to become what it is designed to become. But it's, I think, very misleading to say the experience teaches us in the example of language and math and morality. At least when we talk about the fundamentals of it. Doesn't mean that we know every single details of math or morality or everything about the language by birth. No, it doesn't mean that. But what I am saying and what nativists are saying, we have the fundamentals of these skills in us, already in us, priori, before the experience. So far, as you can tell, that I am more in alignment with the nativist approach than the behaviorist approach. But what do you think? Do you really think that our mind is designed for the world, or the world forms our mind? Or maybe there's a happy medium somewhere? What do you think? It's an interesting question to ask. Now you might think that, so why do we care about this innateness argument? What's the significance of it, especially in the education domain? Why do we even care? But imagine this: if you think that children are born as blank slates, knowing nothing, versus you think that children have some innate knowledge, I think it affects at least in some cases, will affect your behaviors towards children. If you think that they already have some sort of knowledge, and we respect knowledge, right? I think it will probably push you to be more respectful towards children, because they already know some stuff. They have something. They're not like empty vessels, blank slates that waiting for you to dump some knowledge on. And this also it might influence your teaching practices. For instance, if you think that children have some innate knowledge, maybe you will be more inclined to provide the optimum environment for children to discover this knowledge, rather than directly just teach them and drill-based practices and trying to just dump knowledge on them. So not only just educational practices, but as your attitude towards children in general, I think, will be affected by how you think or what you think about the nature of knowledge. Like, how do we know what we know? If children have a prior knowledge, you might think that, hey, they're not just little, humans, and they know nothing. They're like the passive recipient of knowledge, and I am teaching them, versus they know something. How can I help them discover what they know? And I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and I have provided a reference slide, so you can go back and look at these resources. I use them some of them I use them in my presentation, some of them for you to just get some deeper information from this resources. Thank you very much for watching.